"Why are you even here? You were told not to come," my daughter's new husband screamed during the reception I financed, his face twisted in a mask of fury. I managed a calm smile concealing the sting of betrayal and said, "I am leaving, but allow me to introduce my plus one, an old acquaintance of yours." The moment he recognized the man, his eyes went wide with terror, and he collapsed in a dead faint. The wheels of justice were just beginning to turn. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The front door slammed shut, rattling the art on my living room walls. "Father, I'm engaged," Jessica burst in, out of breath and beaming, extending her left hand toward me as if it were a trophy. A large diamond captured the light from the lamp, casting miniature rainbows on her cheeks. I put down my mug of tea as the evening broadcast continued to drone from the television. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. When did Greg? Last night at that French bistro downtown." Her tone had a defensive quality, as if she was bracing for an argument I hadn't even started. She tossed her jacket carelessly over the back of my recliner. "I know exactly what you're going to say." "What am I going to say?" "That he isn't right. For me. That I'm moving too fast. That I need more time to be sure. Yada, yada, yada." She stalked over to the bay window before spinning around to confront me. "Look, I'm 29 years old, Father. I can make my own choices." I analyzed her expression, the strained smile, how she nervously twisted the new ring on her finger. After 40 years in investment banking, I had become an expert at reading people. Those who spoke the quickest were often the ones with the most to conceal. "Have you picked a day?" "July 20th. "That leaves us 2 months to get everything arranged." She sat on the very edge of the sofa, poised, as if ready to flee. "Greg wants something sophisticated and elegant, the kind of wedding that gets noticed." 2 months seems very soon, for we don't feel like waiting. The words tumbled out of her. And why should we? When it's right, isn't it? That's what you always said about Mom. The comparison was a low blow because it was false. Your mother and I were together for 3 years before I proposed. But pointing that out now would only escalate things. Do you have a location in mind? The Grand Hyatt. Greg has contacts who can get us a deal. She nervously smoothed her dress, refusing to meet my gaze. It's going to be magnificent. Around 250 people. 250 people at the Grand Hyatt. I ran a quick calculation in my head and disliked the number it produced. That's going to be pricey. It will run about 70,000, maybe 80. She finally looked up, her chin jutting out defiantly. "I know that's a lot, but this is my wedding, Father. My only wedding. I want it to be perfect." And there it was. The true purpose behind the dramatic entrance, the preemptive defensiveness, and the rushed schedule. Greg wanted a lavish wedding, and Jessica expected me to foot the bill. $70,000. You always said you would help when I got married. You made a promise to Mom before she passed that you'd ensure I had a beautiful wedding. Her voice trembled on the last words. "You're not going to break that promise, are you?" She had me there. I had promised Eleanor. But Eleanor would have insisted on spending months getting to know Greg, probing with questions, ensuring he was worthy of our daughter. Eleanor would have seen right through his slick charm in 5 minutes flat. "Of course, I'll contribute to the wedding." The words escaped me before I could reconsider. "But I think we should talk about the budget." "Oh, thank you." She leapt up and gave me a kiss on the cheek, her mood changing with dizzying speed. Greg is going to be so relieved. He was so stressed about the cost, trying to see how they could swing it on his startup's budget. Another red flag. What sort of man asks a woman to marry him when he can't afford the wedding? I should take Greg out to dinner, a chance to get to know my future son-in-law. That would be perfect. He's been dying to talk to you about his new AI venture. He has tremendous respect for seasoned investors like you. She grabbed her jacket, now in a hurry to depart. I should go tell him the good news about the wedding finances. She was already at the door as I started to get up. "Jessica, hold on." "Love you, Father." Thanks for being so understanding." The door clicked softly shut, leaving me in the silence with the television and the resonance of her words. I looked at the closed door for a long time. The house suddenly felt cavernous and lonely. $70,000 for a wedding to a man I barely knew, for a daughter who felt like a stranger. I shut off the TV and took my mug to the kitchen. The atmosphere in the house had shifted after Jessica's whirlwind appearance, now thick with unspoken worries and unresolved issues. I washed the mug, moving through my nightly routine on autopilot as my brain replayed our conversation, her every defensive tick. The kitchen carried the faint aroma of the pot roast I'd warmed for my supper, Eleanor's old recipe, though I could never quite replicate her way with herbs. I wiped the countertops and folded the dish towel, needing to keep my hands occupied. As my thoughts raced, $70,000. The figure kept returning, sharp and demanding. I felt an inexplicable pull toward my study. The room was a museum of the last 2 decades. Business accolades collecting dust, photo albums Eleanor had meticulously curated, and tax records in perfect chronological order. I took one of the albums off the shelf, its leather cover worn soft. Over the years, the photographs painted a picture so different from the one tonight. There was Jessica at 5, missing 2 front teeth, and laughing on my shoulders at Elitch Gardens. At 10, beaming with pride next to her volcano for the science fair. High school graduation, tears rolling down her face as she hugged us both. College drop-off day, affecting an air of independence while being secretly terrified. When had she become so defensive, so quick to believe I was judging her? Perhaps I was. Greg Thornton had entered our lives 6 months prior with his designer. Suits and ambiguous talk of synergistic AI solutions. He name-dropped financiers I'd never heard of and spouted buzzwords that were utterly meaningless. Yet Jessica's face lit up when he spoke, as if she were in the presence of a visionary, not a showman. I turned to Eleanor's favorite picture of the 3 of us from Jessica's college graduation. We seemed so whole then, so sure of what was to come. Eleanor had been gone for 2 years, but the void she left still ambushed me at times. She would have known how to navigate tonight's conversation. Eleanor could have asked the tough questions without putting Jessica on the defensive. The quiet of the house felt immense, filled with the weight of conversations Eleanor and I could never have, of choices I now had to make on my own. Being a parent didn't stop when your child became a legal adult. In some ways, it got harder. When Jessica was small, I could shield her from scraped knees and schoolyard bullies. But how do you shield a grown woman from her own decisions? My phone vibrated with a text. It was Jessica. "Greg says dinner tomorrow at 7. Giovanni's on Larimer Street." I looked at the text for a long moment before replying, "Sounds great. Maybe." I was being too critical. Perhaps my paternal instincts were getting the better of my judgment. Greg might be precisely who he appeared to be. A young innovator in love with my daughter. The pricey wedding, the polished charm, the way he materialized whenever money was discussed, maybe it was all just a series of coincidences. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. Tomorrow, I would give Greg Thornton a fair hearing. I would inquire about his company, his ambitions, his intentions for Jessica. I would act like the supportive father-in-law he anticipated, not the cynical investor I had become. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10:30. Time for bed, though I knew sleep would be elusive. I turned off the lights in the study and walked upstairs, already mapping out the conversation for tomorrow's dinner. Common interests, shared values, the bedrock of any strong relationship. If Greg was to become family, I had to find a way to make it work. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie for the 3rd time. The deep blue silk had been a favorite of Eleanor's. She'd given it to me on our 20th anniversary, saying it brought out the color of my eyes. Tonight felt significant. Enough for Eleanor's tie. Significant enough for the good cufflinks and the cologne, I reserved for important events. 7:15. My plan was to arrive precisely on time, not so early as to appear overeager, nor so late as to seem disrespectful. Giovanni's on Larimer Street was Greg's pick, a high-end Italian restaurant where a single meal likely cost more than my weekly grocery budget in my younger days. But if this was Greg's attempt to impress me, I would indulge him. I checked my wallet, credit cards, cash, and a few business cards just in case. My phone had no new texts from Jessica since she'd confirmed dinner. No last-minute cancellations, no nervous messages pleading with me to be kind to Greg. Perhaps she was confident things would go smoothly, or perhaps she was simply confident in Greg's ability to handle himself. The drive downtown would be about 30 minutes in the evening rush. I took my keys and walked to the garage, mentally practicing opening lines. I'd ask about his business, not the vague nonsense about synergistic AI, but about the specifics, revenue models, client acquisition, growth metrics, the kinds of questions that separate a real venture from a pipe dream. Sports might be a safer topic. The Rockies were looking promising in spring training. The Nuggets were rebuilding, as usual. These were neutral subjects, free of personal or professional landmines. Although Greg seemed more like the type to discuss golf, prestigious courses, exclusive memberships, the kind of networking that unfolds over 18 holes. I reversed out. Of the driveway, the evening sun casting long shadows through the aspens lining my street. April in Denver always felt like a new beginning. Winter's grip finally loosening, the promise of warmer days ahead. Maybe that's what tonight was about, too. A new chapter, an expanding family, the natural order of things I'd been resisting. Eleanor would have adored planning a wedding. She'd have driven Jessica mad with cake tastings and floral consultations, but in the most loving way. She would have found a way to connect with Greg, to welcome him into our family with her natural gift for making people feel at ease. I wasn't Eleanor, but I could try to emulate her approach tonight. Traffic on I-25 was moving well. I'd left with time to spare, so arriving a little early wouldn't be a problem. It might even offer a chance to see how Greg treated the restaurant's staff. A person's character is often revealed by how they treat those in service positions. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I ignored it, keeping my attention on the road and the impending conversation. Tonight was for building bridges, for finding a connection with the man who was to marry my daughter. Any business could wait. The Denver skyline emerged ahead as I neared the city center, glass skyscrapers reflecting the setting sun. This was Greg's world. Pricey restaurants, urban chic, the lifestyle of money and ambition. Perhaps that was the appeal for Jessica. After a childhood in the quiet, tree-lined comfort of Cherry Creek, the city's vibrant energy must have seemed thrilling. I found a parking spot a couple of blocks from Giovanni's and gave my reflection a final check in the rearview mirror. Gray, hair combed, tie straight, suit jacket crisp. I looked the part. A successful businessman meeting his future son-in-law. Professional, yet approachable, curious, but not prying. The spring air was cool as I walked toward the restaurant. In 2 hours, I would know if Greg Thornton was worthy of my daughter's heart and my financial backing. Tonight would define our relationship moving forward. It was time to find out what kind of man wanted to join my family. The hostess at Giovanni's led me through the bustling dining room to a more secluded area at the back. Crystal chandeliers bathed white-clothed tables in a warm glow, and the low hum of conversation created an aura of expensive taste. I squared my shoulders, ready for the evening's diplomacy. The private room had a table set for 8, with only one chair vacant. Greg rose as I entered, but his smile was cold. "Ah, here he is, our generous benefactor," he announced, his voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. The other guests, Greg's sister, 2 business partners, and an older couple I didn't know, stirred uncomfortably. Jessica shot Greg a look of warning, but he paid her no mind. "Greg," I said, extending my hand, determined to start on the right foot. "Thank you for putting this together." He squeezed my hand a little too hard. "Of course, especially with you footing the bill for the wedding." I took my seat, noticing that Greg had placed himself at the head of the table, as if he were the host. A waiter poured wine as I observed the people around me. Greg's sister looked mortified. His business associate seemed well practiced at ignoring his boorishness. "So, Arthur," Greg continued, leaning back with an air of satisfaction, "Jessica tells me you're retired. Must be nice to have all that time on your hands." "I keep myself occupied," I replied, my voice even and professional. "What about your ventures? Jessica mentioned you're developing something groundbreaking." "Several things, actually. You wouldn't grasp the tech." He waved his hand dismissively. "It demands a certain forward-thinking mindset your generation tends to lack." Jessica reached a hand toward Greg. "He didn't mean—" "I meant precisely what I said." Greg's focus remained locked on me. "Some people are stuck in the old ways. Investment banking, traditional portfolios. Safe, but dull." The older couple exchanged a worried glance. Greg's sister was now staring intently at her bread plate, wishing she could disappear. "Traditional methods have their advantages," I said carefully. "Stability, proven results, actual profits." "Profits?" Greg laughed, a humorless sound. "How delightfully quaint. Tell me, did you ever take a real risk in your career, or did you just shuffle other people's money around?" A flush of anger rose in my neck, but I kept my composure. "Every investment is a calculated risk. The trick is to distinguish between an opportunity and a gamble." Spoken like a true fossil, Greg raised his glass in a mock toast. No wonder Jessica had to find someone with a real vision for her future. Jessica's face turned crimson. "Greg, stop it. This is supposed to be a celebration." "It is a celebration. We're celebrating Jessica's escape from small-mindedness." He leaned back, thoroughly enjoying himself. "Though I suppose we should be grateful for the financial backing, even if it's paired with outdated advice." My jaw tightened, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "I am here because I love my daughter. I'm sure we can find some common ground." "Common ground?" Greg repeated the words as if they were poison. "You mean the ground where you rubber-stamp my decisions and I pretend to value your opinions?" The waiter arrived with our main courses, creating a brief respite. But Greg wasn't done. He sliced into his steak with exaggerated force, the knife grating on the plate. "Actually, Arthur, I've been thinking about our future family dynamic. We may need to establish some boundaries." Greg's wine glass was already half drained when the entrees were served. The alcohol had eroded what little self-control he possessed, and a predatory light danced in his eyes that set me on edge. "You know what I've realized tonight," Greg declared, loud enough for the adjacent tables to hear? "Family gatherings are so much more pleasant when everyone understands their place." Jessica's fork stopped midair. "Greg, maybe we ought to—" "No, let me finish." He raised a hand as if directing an orchestra. "Your father seems to be confused about his role in our new life together." I carefully set down my silverware, feeling the familiar calm that always came before a high-stakes negotiation. "I'm not sure I follow." "Oh, I'm sure you do." Greg leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "You see, there's a matter we need to clear up regarding the wedding." The table went silent. Even Greg's talkative sister had stopped eating, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Greg sat up straight, his voice booming once more. "Listen, old man, you're not to show up at the wedding tomorrow." The words struck me with physical force. I heard sharp gasps around the table, the clatter of a fork dropped in haste. "That is not acceptable." Jessica's voice was a mixture of shock and fury. "Greg, you can't just—" "Actually, I can." Greg's smugness was sickening. "It's our wedding, Jess. We decide who's welcome and who isn't. Greg, end this now." Jessica's hands were trembling as she reached for him. "That's my father you're talking to." Yes, your father, who has second-guessed my every decision since day one. Greg turned back to me, his smile like a razor. Jessica, your father is spoiling our evening yet again. I stared at him, absorbing the calculated cruelty of the act. This wasn't a drunken slip-up. It was a premeditated public humiliation, performed for an audience to assert his dominance. The other guests sat frozen, looking away as if witnessing a terrible accident. Greg's sister had a hand clapped over her mouth. One of his associates was examining his wine glass with intense focus. I see, I said. I folded my napkin and placed it neatly beside my untouched plate. Thank you for the clarification. Dad, don't. Jessica began to rise, but Greg's hand shot out and clamped onto her wrist, stopping her. Let him go, honey. Some people just can't handle the truth. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate despite the fury churning inside me. 40 years of boardroom battles had taught me when to press an attack and when to make a strategic retreat. This was neither the time nor the place for a confrontation. Jessica, I said, looking directly at my daughter and ignoring Greg entirely. I love you. Nothing will ever change that. Daddy, please, we can fix this. Tears welled in her eyes, but she made no move to pull her wrist from Greg's grasp. Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation. I reached for my wallet, but Greg waved a dismissive hand. Don't worry about the bill, Arthur. I've got this one. Of course he did, with my money funneled through Jessica's bank account. I walked to the exit with a measured pace, giving the hostess a polite nod, holding on to the dignity Greg had tried to steal from me. Behind me, I could hear Jessica's voice rising in protest, and Greg's becoming increasingly defensive. The cool night air felt good on my face as I stepped out onto Larimer Street. The city pulsed around me with traffic, faint music, and the sound of people enjoying their Friday night. Normal people, with normal lives. I got my car from the valet, tipped him well, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before turning the key. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. But a fundamental shift had just occurred. Greg Thornton had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The steering wheel was firm in my hands as I drove away from the restaurant. The slow crawl of downtown Denver traffic gave me ample time to think. Each red light was a chance to dissect Greg's words, to analyze the malicious intent behind his public spectacle. My phone buzzed. Jessica's name lit up the screen, but I ignored it and let the call go to voicemail. We both needed space to process the evening's events before any rational discussion could take place. The city lights streamed by, glass towers reflecting the glow of the streets, people hurrying to their Friday night plans. The ordinary pulse of the city went on, oblivious to the fact that my world had just been upended. When I reached Spear Boulevard, I made a spontaneous turn toward the waterfront instead of heading home to Cherry Creek. The familiar drive to the Cherry Creek Reservoir beckoned, a place Eleanor and I often went when faced with difficult decisions. I parked with a view of the water, the dark surface stretching out to a black horizon. The Denver skyline glowed behind me, but before me was only darkness and the faint sound of water lapping at the shore. This was my sanctuary for tough business deals and life's hard choices. Greg's behavior tonight was not about a wedding guest list. It was a raw power play, a public declaration that he was in complete control of Jessica. The way he had grabbed her wrist, the smug satisfaction in his voice as she defended him despite his cruelty, these were not the actions of a man in love. I had spent 4 decades evaluating people in boardrooms. The desperate ones overtalked. The deceitful ones met questions with hostility. The truly dangerous ones took pleasure in inflicting pain. Greg Thornton took pleasure in inflicting pain. My phone vibrated again. I checked the voicemail from Jessica's earlier call. Dad, I'm so sorry. Greg had too much wine and he's just stressed about the wedding. He didn't mean it. Please call me. We have to fix this. She was already making excuses for him, reframing the night's events to cast Greg as a victim of pressure rather than the perpetrator of deliberate cruelty. I'd seen this pattern in business, people so committed to a bad investment that they'd rationalize anything to avoid admitting their error. But this wasn't an investment, this was my daughter's future. I gazed out at the reservoir, recalling Eleanor's wisdom from our years of parenting. Sometimes you have to let them make their own mistakes, but other times you have to intervene, even if they resent you for it. The question was, which time was this? Greg's aggressive defensiveness pointed to a man with secrets to hide. His vague descriptions of his business, his lavish lifestyle with no apparent source of income, his instant hostility toward any probing questions, these were not the hallmarks of legitimate success. I started the car and headed back toward Cherry Creek with a new sense of resolve. Protecting Jessica would require more than just fatherly advice. It would demand the same investigative instincts that had served me so well in my career, the boss. Ability to dig deep, ask the right questions, and uncover what people desperately wanted to keep hidden. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my course was set. I would not stand by and watch Greg dismantle my daughter's life. I would not hope that love could magically overcome such glaring red flags. Starting tomorrow, I would discover exactly who Greg Thornton really was. The lakeside wedding venue was breathtaking under the afternoon sun, its massive windows offering a panoramic view of the water's shimmering blue. White floral arrangements adorned every surface, and a string quartet played softly near the dance floor where Jessica, a vision in her gown, was already dancing. She looked ecstatic, completely oblivious to the tempest about to crash her perfect day. I straightened my tie and walked in, surveying the room with a banker's eye for strategic positioning. The reception hall was a long, open space with several exits and excellent sightlines, ideal for what was about to unfold. It had been a long night. After leaving the reservoir, I'd spent hours on the phone, leveraging my network, chasing down leads, and making a series of strategic calls. 23 calls, to be precise. The 24th had connected me to Carter Blackwood, and from there, everything had clicked into place like a perfectly executed acquisition. Greg was holding court by the bar, gesturing with a champagne flute, captivating a small audience with tales of synergistic AI and market disruption. His tailored tuxedo fit him impeccably, likely bought with someone else's capital. His confident grin, his casual acceptance of congratulations. He genuinely thought he had won last night's battle. I took a position at the back of the room, near the service entrance Carter would be using. From here, I had a clear view of everything while remaining unnoticed. The irony was not lost on me, lurking in the shadows at my own daughter's wedding, poised to annihilate her husband's life. Guests mingled with the effortless grace that wealth affords. I recognized a few faces from Greg's disastrous dinner and others from Jessica's college days. They laughed and clinked their glasses, celebrating what they thought was a fairy tale, romance. None of them knew they were about to witness the final act of a long-running con. My phone buzzed. A text from Carter. Parked. Docs are ready. ETA 5 minutes. The plan was beautifully simple. Carter would make his entrance at the peak of the celebration, when Greg was at his most arrogant and had the largest crowd. Public. Humiliation is a far more effective form of justice than a private reckoning. Greg had chosen to shame me before an audience. Now he would learn how it felt to be exposed when the stakes were highest. Jessica twirled on the dance floor, her dress billowing around her, her smile bright enough to light the entire venue. For a fleeting moment, my determination wavered. This was her wedding day, a day she had dreamed of her whole life. Was I about to shatter her happiness just to settle a score? Then I recalled Greg's words from the night before. Your father is spoiling our evening. The calculated cruelty, the public dismissal, the way he had gripped Jessica's wrist. This wasn't about my bruised ego. This was about saving my daughter from a predator who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. Greg's laughter echoed across the room as he spun a tale for his admirers. He gestured toward the lake, probably claiming credit for selecting such a stunning location. His entire persona was a performance, from his rehearsed charm to his counterfeit confidence. The string quartet shifted to a more upbeat, celebratory piece. Guests began to gather around the newlyweds for photos, their phones capturing what they believed was a moment of pure bliss. In a few minutes, those same phones would be recording something very different. I checked my watch. Carter would be walking through the door any second. Greg continued his act, completely unaware that his past was about to collide violently with his present. Across the room, Greg's eyes scanned the crowd, soaking in the admiration, savoring his moment of triumph. And then his gaze locked onto mine. His champagne flute paused mid-air. The self-satisfied smile vanished. Greg's expression shifted from celebration to pure rage in a fraction of a second. He shoved his glass into the hands of a nearby guest and began to carve a path through. The crowd, with a predator's intensity, his expensive tuxedo making him look like a shark in formal attire. Conversations died down as he pushed past dancing couples and chatting groups. The string quartet continued to play, but a palpable tension had settled over the room as guests sensed the impending conflict. Jessica looked up from her photos, her radiant face clouded with confusion. "What are you doing here?" Greg's voice boomed through the reception hall, slicing through the music and laughter like a guillotine. "You weren't invited yesterday." The words bounced off the glass walls, reaching every corner of the venue. The string quartet faltered and then fell silent. Guests turned to face us, their expressions a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Smartphones instinctively rose to document the unfolding drama. I remained perfectly still, hands clasped behind my back, observing Greg's public unraveling with a cool, professional detachment. This was exactly as I had planned, his arrogance, on full display for all to see. "Greg, please," Jessica started. Toward us, her wedding dress swishing with urgency. "No!" He held up a trembling hand, his voice cracking with a combination of alcohol and fury. This man disrespected me. He disrespected our relationship, and now he has the audacity to show up here and ruin our wedding. "I'm leaving," I said quietly, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. "But first, allow me to introduce you to my special guest." I gestured toward the entrance, where Carter Blackwood had just appeared with impeccable timing. "I believe you're familiar with your old business partner." Carter Blackwood was a man who commanded attention. Tall, with silver hair and a charcoal suit that bespoke serious wealth, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to high-stakes negotiations. His briefcase looked both expensive and important. Greg's aggressive stance melted away as recognition dawned. His face turned a ghostly white, then a sickly gray, the color draining from it like water from a cracked vase. "Greg Thornton." Carter's voice had the sharp, clear authority of a courtroom. "I've finally found you." A confused murmur spread through the wedding guests, who sensed something momentous was happening, but couldn't yet grasp its nature. Greg stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. Carter advanced with deliberate steps, each one echoing in the now silent hall. He opened his briefcase with practiced ease and removed a thick sheaf of legal papers. "Greg Thornton, you are hereby served," he announced, his voice ringing out. "This is a lawsuit demanding the repayment of $1,500,000 plus accrued interest and legal fees, which you fraudulently obtained from Blackwood Venture Partners under false pretenses." The words landed like hammer blows. Greg's hands trembled as Carter thrust the papers at him, but he seemed incapable of comprehending what was happening. His meticulously crafted new life was imploding in real time, in front of everyone who mattered. Jessica gasped, her bouquet tumbling from her limp fingers. $1.5 million? Greg? What is he talking about? The guests pressed closer, all pretense of polite detachment gone. Cell phones were recording every second as Greg stared at the documents as if they were written in an alien script. 2 years, Carter continued, his voice resonating through the hall. For 2 years, I've been searching for you, Mr. Thornton. You vanished with my investors' money, left a trail of forged documents, and thought you could start over with someone else's daughter. Greg's knees seemed to buckle. He clutched the papers, his knuckles white, his wedding day swagger completely gone. The man who had humiliated me less than 24 hours ago now looked like a trapped animal. Greg! Jessica's voice was sharp with dawning horror. Is this true? Did you steal money? But Greg was incapable of answering. He stood paralyzed, holding the evidence of his crimes, as his new bride and their wedding guests watched his carefully constructed world turned to dust. Greg's hand shook as he scanned the summons, his eyes flitting over the legal jargon that detailed his financial ruin. The magnificent wedding venue had transformed into a courtroom, with 150 guests as the jury. Witnessing his utter downfall, $1,500,000 plus interest, he whispered, the numbers themselves seeming to inflict physical pain. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, despite the cool breeze coming off the lake. His tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap costume, a prop from a play that had just been exposed as a sham. The wedding guests surged forward, their celebration forgotten in the thrill of the unfolding scandal. Smartphones captured every angle of Greg's collapse, documenting his transition from confident groom to cornered felon. The string quartet stood motionless with their instruments, unsure if they should resume playing for a party that had ceased to exist. Carter watched Greg's reaction with the cool satisfaction of a job well done. "Arthur, thank you," he said, extending a hand to me. "I've been on this man's trail for 2 years. Your business contacts were instrumental in finally locating him." "Justice had to be served," I replied simply, shaking his hand. The words carried a profound weight in the silent hall, explaining everything and nothing to the bewildered guests. Jessica stood frozen in her wedding dress, her bouquet lying at her feet like a symbol of her shattered dreams. "Greg, please tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't steal from people." But Greg couldn't find the words. The court documents trembled in his hands as he read the specifics of forged signatures, shell corporations, and the elaborate deceptions that had financed his opulent lifestyle. Every expensive meal, every designer suit, every romantic gesture, all funded by theft. "The wedding," Jessica whispered, the horrific realization dawning in her voice. "The venue, the flowers, this dress. Where did the money come from?" Greg's silence was his confession. His carefully built identity was vaporizing before our eyes, leaving only the stark reality of what he was, a common criminal who had used my daughter's love as a shield for his crimes. Carter snapped his briefcase shut with a sound of finality. "Mr. Thornton, you have 30 days to respond to this summons. I advise you to retain a very good lawyer." He turned to me, his gratitude genuine. "Thank you again, Arthur. The authorities will likely want to speak with you about how you found him." The wedding reception had utterly imploded. Guests huddled in stunned groups, their whispers and pointing, fingers replacing the sounds of celebration. The elegant lakeside venue, with its stunning views and perfect floral arrangements, had become the scene of a public shaming and a criminal exposé. I looked at my daughter, still beautiful in her white gown, but now faced with the knowledge that her marriage was a fraud built on a mountain of lies. The anguish in her eyes was a knife in my heart, but beneath the pain I could see the first flicker of understanding. Her father had not been trying to run her life. He had been trying to save it. "Jessica," I said softly, walking to where she stood frozen amidst the scattered petals, "I'm sorry it had to be this way." She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears and confusion. You knew who he was. I suspected, I investigated, I found Carter. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Sometimes protecting the people you love means doing things they won't understand until much later. Greg finally spoke, but his voice was a broken rasp. Jess, I can explain. It's all a big misunderstanding. I was going to pay it all back. With whose money? Carter interjected coldly. You have no legitimate business, no real income, and no assets that you haven't stolen from someone else. The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Greg's empire of deceit had been demolished in under 10 minutes, leaving nothing but a pile of legal documents and broken vows. Carter and I walked toward the exit together, our work here complete. Behind us, the elegant wedding reception continued its metamorphosis into something like a crime scene, complete with witnesses, evidence, and a perpetrator. Justice had been delivered with perfect timing and devastating precision. The drive home was unlike any I had ever taken. The familiar tree-lined streets of Cherry Creek seemed calmer, more orderly, as if the neighborhood itself understood that a great wrong had been righted. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, replaying the afternoon's events with the deep satisfaction of a banker who has just closed the most critical deal of his career. Inside, the house's silence felt peaceful rather than lonely. I went directly to my home office, where the wedding contracts and financial records were waiting in neat piles on my desk. Eleanor had always admired my organizational skills. Everything was filed, labeled, and ready for a moment just like this. My first call was to the private banking line at First National, where Martha Harrison had managed my finances for 15 years. Mr. Stewart, how may I help you today? Martha, I need to cancel a wire transfer that's scheduled for tomorrow morning, $70,000 to Grand Hyatt Catering. Of course. Do you have the transaction number? I read the reference number from my notes and listened to the clatter of her keyboard as she pulled up the details. Here it is, scheduled as the final payment for wedding services. Shall I cancel the entire amount? Yes. The contracts have been nullified due to the discovery of fraud. I'll process that right away. You'll have a written confirmation within 1 business day. The efficiency was gratifying. No prying questions, no judgment, just professional service handling a legitimate financial matter. Next, I began calling the vendors. It was systematic, methodical. I documented each conversation with the same precision I'd used in my investment career. The florist was the first to answer. For the Stewart Thornton wedding? Oh my, we heard. The reception came to a rather sudden end. Is everyone okay? The contracts are void due to the discovery of fraud. I am stopping all payments, effective immediately. Her tone instantly shifted to business. I see. Well, the arrangements were delivered and set up. We'll need to discuss partial compensation for services rendered. Send an itemized invoice. Direct all collection efforts to Greg Thornton. Every call followed a similar script. The caterer was concerned about the half-eaten meals. The band wanted to know about payment for their 3-hour set. The photographer inquired about the delivery of the wedding album. I gave each of them the same professional response. Fraud discovered, contracts void. Pursue Greg Thornton for payment. By 7 p.m., I had made 9 calls and halted 6 separate payment authorizations. The total financial blow to Greg and Jessica would be roughly $52,000 in immediate debt, money that would have to come from a source other than my bank account. I felt a brief pang of sympathy for Jessica. She would wake up tomorrow to a financials reality she had never known, with bills her criminal husband couldn't pay with stolen funds. But sometimes protecting people means letting them experience the full consequences of their choices. My phone rang as I was filing the last of the confirmation emails. The caller ID showed Jessica. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Before letting it go to voicemail, she needed time to process who Greg really was before we could have a meaningful conversation. Tonight, she was likely still furious with me for destroying her wedding. Tomorrow, she might start to understand that I had saved her from a lifetime of ruin. The phone rang again before I had finished filing the bank documents. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, vanished when I didn't pick up, and then reappeared 3 minutes later. I moved to the kitchen and began to make a simple dinner: grilled salmon, steamed asparagus, and wild rice. It was normal, methodical, and peaceful. The phone rang twice more as I seasoned the fish. In the living room, I sat down in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the evening news. The mayor of Denver was discussing a new light rail project. The Rockies had won their home opener. The forecast called for pleasant spring weather through the weekend. The phone rang during the sports report. Jessica again. I sipped my tea and listened to the weather, trying to recall if I had any weekend plans that might be affected by rain. The garden could use some work, but that would have to wait until this family crisis was fully resolved. 15 minutes later, another call, and then another. A predictable pattern emerged. Every 5 to 10 minutes, Jessica's name would illuminate the screen. I started keeping a mental tally. Call 7 came during the national news, call 8 during a commercial break, call 9 when the local news anchor returned. By 8:30, the count was up to 18. I switched to a documentary about the Amazon rainforest, finding the wildlife more calming than the drama playing out on my phone. Even the brutal realities of the natural world seemed less complicated than human affairs. Call 23 came during a segment on poison dart frogs. Call 24 interrupted a discussion about deforestation. I refilled my tea and put on my reading glasses, settling in for what was clearly going to be a long night. The documentary finished at 9:15. The call count was 31. I surfed the channels for a bit, landing on a British detective show that Eleanor had loved. The inspector was questioning suspects in a grand country estate, each one harboring secrets that were destined to be revealed. Art imitating life, but with better dialogue and more picturesque scenery. Between 9:15 and 10 o'clock, another 12 calls came in. The desperation was palpable, even through the silent screen. The intervals between her attempts grew shorter. The phone barely had time to go dark before it lit up again. Call 44 came at 10:07. I turned off the television and began my nightly routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and new chances for Jessica to understand why her father had acted with such seeming cruelty. Tonight, she was learning that choices have consequences, that fraudulent husbands come with unforeseen expenses, and that independence is more than just a declaration. In the bathroom, I brushed my teeth while my phone remained blessedly quiet for nearly 8 minutes. Call 45 interrupted me as I was changing into my pajamas. By the time I turned off the lights and got into bed, Jessica had called 44 times in 3 hours. I switched the phone to silent mode and set it face down on the nightstand. She would have to navigate this crisis on her own, without a financial bailout from her father. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to answer the phone. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Denver County Courthouse and watched Greg Thornton learn his fate. The man who had so arrogantly humiliated me at dinner now looked 20 years older. His designer suits had been replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, and his smug demeanor had been crushed under the weight of multiple felony convictions. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 24 months in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $1,800,000 to the victims in this case, Judge Rodriguez announced with professional finality. Carter leaned over from the seat beside me. 16 victims in total. The investigation uncovered a lot more than just my case. Greg had constructed an entire criminal enterprise on charm and fabricated credentials, investment scams, fictitious partnerships, and forged financial statements. The sheer scale of his deceit made my daughter's narrow escape feel all the more miraculous. Outside the courthouse, Carter shook my hand with heartfelt gratitude. I never would have found him without your contacts, Arthur. Thank you for making that call. Justice had to be served, I replied, the same words I had used at Jessica's wedding. They felt just as true today. Carter headed to his car, his briefcase filled with the restitution orders that would, in time, recover most of his stolen capital. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching the afternoon traffic on its way, and wondered if my daughter was ready to start rebuilding our relationship. That evening, I finally called her. Dad. Her voice was different, older, more subdued, but lacking the defensive edge I had been expecting. Hello, sweetheart. I figured it was time we talked. I've been waiting for your call. There was a pause. I found out about the other victims. 16 people, Dad. Greg stole from 16 different people. I know. I was at his sentencing today. You were there? Another longer pause. I should have been there too, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see his face again. You never have to see him again. The vendors have been calling non-stop. The bills, the canceled checks. I get it now. I understand what you did and why. Her voice hitched. I'm so sorry I didn't trust you. Come over for dinner tomorrow, I said. We have a lot to talk about. The next evening, Jessica arrived at 6 o'clock on the dot. She brought a bottle of wine and was dressed in the kind of professional attire that suggested she was taking her career more seriously. She looked weary but resilient, like someone who had been through a trial by fire and emerged stronger. You saved me from being victim number 17, she said as we sat down to eat. I protected my daughter. That's a father's job, even when his daughter is too headstrong to see it. She raised her glass to lessons learned the hard way. We talked late into the night about trust, independence, financial literacy, and the critical difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Jessica had spent 3 weeks learning what life was like without her father's financial safety net, and the experience had taught her more about self-sufficiency than any lecture ever could. I'm going to pay you back, she said, as we cleared the table. Every cent, the vendors, the wedding deposits, all of it. It might take me a while, but I'll pay it back. Keep your money, I told her. Consider it tuition for one of life's most valuable courses. She hugged me then, a real heartfelt hug, for the first time since before Greg Thornton had entered her life. Justice had been done, our family bond had been tested and fortified, and my daughter had emerged from the ordeal wiser, more independent, and finally free from the charming predator who had nearly ruined her future. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing your thoughts about the story in the comments. To hear our next story, please click on the video to your left. Thank you for listening.